Hello and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry. Tonight we're going to be going right back to the basics and looking exactly at what is inquiry and why you might want to start using it in your classroom if you haven't already done so. My name is Patty and I am a 4-5 split grade teacher in Ontario, Canada, and I come to you every week with a new video. We are here talking about everything using inquiry in your classroom, and it is my hope that through these videos you can use more inquiry-based learning in your class to make it fun and interesting for both you and your students. So again, we're talking about going right back to the basics and looking exactly at what is inquiry. So many times the perception of inquiry is that students should be coming up with an inquiry question and then developing this entire immense project that gets them to change the world. In reality, inquiry doesn't have to be quite so broad. An inquiry can be narrowly focused, and teachers can use an inquiry-based teaching perspective lesson by lesson. So I want to talk about what that lesson might look like today in our video. So inquiry-based learning at its most basic level is a paradigm shift from teaching through instructions to teaching with questions. And framing that understanding of inquiry-based learning has definitely helped me to transition from that traditional role of teacher that I grew up with as a student, where my teacher gave us information and we learned it and then were tested on it. In a 21st century classroom environment and in the world that we are living in, it is so drastically different from the world that we grew up in. At least if you're anywhere near my age, mid-30s, or the latter half of your mid-30s perhaps, what you need to remember is that what I learned as a child is different because we didn't have a lot of the same technology. Technology is rapidly changing each and every day, and new things are coming into play, and we need to teach our students to be adaptable and learn how to navigate this new world that they're living in, something that we didn't have to contend with when we were growing up. In an inquiry-based classroom, it's not teacher choice that drives instruction, but instead, it's student knowledge and curiosity. So we have to take a lead from our students. They are the reasons that we are in the classroom, and they're the reasons that we are teaching. We have to take in their needs into consideration while we are teaching. And this is very inquiry-based because it's student-centered. An inquiry classroom is also a student-centered classroom instead of a teacher-centered classroom. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the entire control structure or the classroom management is necessarily student-centered, because you still have to lead with competence. However, instructionally, we need to have our instruction student-driven. Now, with that being said, it also means that we are working within a system that requires us to teach certain curriculum expectations. So we need to look at inquiry not as a big global thing in our classroom where we just show up every day and ask our students what they want to learn. We do have to look at inquiry in buckets. Essentially, is we are mandated different curriculum expectations that we need to cover. So we will look at inquiry in buckets. Buckets of language, math, science, social studies, the arts, phys ed, all of those can be looked at, and you can use inquiry-based teaching practices to cover the curriculum expectations that are within those documents. So if inquiry-based learning is leading through with questions instead of simply with teacher-directed instructions in a student-centered classroom, that we need to know that if we're leading with questioning, that we understand that even though we may pose questions, that the teacher knows the answer, but it is our job not necessarily just to give students the answer, but to help to guide them on the journey that requires them to find their own answers. Students in an inquiry classroom need to be the ones in the driver's seat looking at how they can push their own learning. In the 21st century, in the world that our students live in, they need to learn how to find their own knowledge because knowledge is changing all the time. So they need to be able to navigate the amount of information that's out there to be able to find answers to their own questions and solve the problems that they are presented with. Now, a lot of the times, inquiry-based instruction seems way up in the air, and it just really seems like a free-for-all where everyone's doing their own thing and the teacher's not really doing much anymore. I want to assure you that a teacher using inquiry might actually be doing more than you think. We have to look at inquiry at the micro level, not at the macro level. So when we're looking at inquiry in the micro level, we're going into our curriculum expectations and we're looking at what are the questions that students could ask, what are the questions that our curriculum will lead us to, and how are we going to find the answers to those questions, and then giving our students lesson by lesson an inquiry type lesson that allows us to drive instruction while using student voice and choice and using our role as not the information giver, but as the guide. So inquiry doesn't have to be, it can, but inquiry doesn't have to be, you put a question on the board and students have a free-for-all to look for the research and try to find it. It also doesn't mean that every single student in your classroom is coming up with their own questions and discovering their own learning through this topic and coming up with this broad inquiry project that they're going to be doing and solving, and then they'll eventually write a thesis to explain exactly what they've learned. I might start with a science topic about the human body. So once I can introduce a topic, and that's where I've started, my next step along the inquiry process is to get them curious, because ultimately I want them to start asking questions about that topic, because it's within those questions that we can seek the answers to those questions, and that's where learning will happen. One of the ways that I get them curious is by curating a set of manipulatives or a bunch of pictures that I can collect, and I use this in a Wonderwall format. And I collect these pictures and I share those with my students. Now, the objects that I pick are specifically targeted to match the curriculum expectations, because remember, in inquiry, I already know the answer, I know where we need to go, but it's my job to guide them to get there. So the items that I'm going to choose to make them curious are going to be things that will lead them along the path or onto the topics that I might want them to explore. So in the human body, one of the main 3 systems that you're going to be focusing on in that unit for grade 5 are going to be the circulatory, respiratory, and digestive systems. So I will make sure that the objects that I put in my getting curious phase are going to be objects that allow my students to be curious about those things. So I will put pictures of the blood, and I will put pictures of a heart, and I will put pictures of the intestines, and I might even put pictures of poop, because it definitely gets kids wondering why it's all in the same Wonderwall activity. So if I'm starting with a topic and I'm looking at what it is they need to learn, and I know where they need to go, but they don't yet, I'm going to put information in front of them that's going to get them curious in that narrow topic. Once I've got them curious, now it's time for me to get them to start asking questions. This allows me to assess what they already know as well as where they need to go. Knowing kind of their starting place on this inquiry journey helps me as a guide to get them from point A to point B, to get them from not knowing some content to getting them to master those curriculum expectations. So if I'm looking, say, at the Indigenous and Early European unit that I cover in grade 5, I will make sure that the regalia and the objects and pictures that I am choosing are going to be objects that represent the different groups that we are going to be looking at within the time period that's being studied. And therefore, when their questions are related to some of those, we can look at organizing those questions into categories and then begin to explore the different aspects of the categories that we've discovered through our questions. Remember, I am guiding them through this instead of just telling them, okay, today we're going to learn about this topic. Now, my experience in teaching this topic has told me that there categories of questions are going to be in certain buckets because of the way that I've structured the beginning of the Wonderwall activity. So I can already have some lessons and ideas of where it is that we're going to be going and how we can explore those different questions that they're typically going to come up with. And because I have planned to guide them through this, there's definitely an element there where I can already have some of the lessons planned and know where we're going to go. And that leads me to the fourth part. Once you have their questions, it's now you get to be the navigator. So if they're the driver and they're in the driver's seat, you get to be the navigator. You've got the map. You just have to help them get to the end of where their knowledge is created. So you're going to give them hints and tips, and you're going to walk them through different lessons and give them different opportunities to learn different concepts to allow them to discover the answers to their questions. So instead of telling them and front loading a lot of that information where you're just going to tell them everything and then ask them to regurgitate all of that information, instead you'll start with a question, you'll give them the information, and then ask them to reflect on what it is they're learning, what they've learned, and how their learning has changed. It's a little bit of a different paradigm shift as you are looking at having students, instead of you just giving them information that you know they need, and then having them answer some questions, and then you assessing what they know. Instead, you're going to start with the questions, then give them some information, have them find the answers to the questions, generally questions that they have come up with you and co-created. They're going to find the answers to those questions, and then you're going to reflect on how their learning has changed. Now, the next three pieces of the inquiry process is really for the teacher and less for the student. And that is that we need to be responsive. In an inquiry-based classroom, we need to remember that we need to be responsive to the student. So again, using the same analogy of they're the driver and you're the navigator, if you are being responsive to student need, then you also need to listen to them and listen to what it is, which car they want to drive and how they want to get there. They have as much input into some of those decisions as you, the navigator, does. So looking at your student needs, where they're coming from, what their background is, understanding that each one of them is going to approach learning a little bit differently, and how you can kind of find common ground and find the average in there to kind of lead the group that direction, listening to their thoughts and ideas and being open to their input on the learning, allowing that voice and choice to be a part of your decision making as a teacher, allowing your students to have a say in what and how they learn something. Not necessarily in what and how they learn, because they do have content that they need to learn, and you're going to help guide them through that list of content. But you do want to look at the how they're going to learn that and be responsive to students. Some students want to really learn hands-on activities, so make sure that some of the ways that you can get them to discover that learning is through hands-on activities. Some students are really good at reading or watching videos. Can you provide both opportunities for students to gain knowledge through different ways of input? And that's really being responsive to what it is that they need and what their choices are. And also on the flip side, be really open as a teacher on how it is that they're going to present to you and show their learning to you. And that there's multiple ways that a group of students could demonstrate their understanding and show you how their knowledge has grown from the beginning to an end of an assessment task. And the next thing that I think we need to focus on is looking at how exactly we assess inquiry learning. So we have to take that baseline data at the beginning to know where students start with. And then we want to be monitoring how their knowledge changes. If we look at the curriculum, that will help us to decide how their learning has changed. What did they know before? What knowledge have they gained now? And have they gained a sufficient amount of knowledge for you to qualitatively and quantitatively say that they have learned the content within the curriculum? And if you have guided them through that path and spent that time reflecting on the things they've learned and consolidating the information that they've gathered, then there will be a change in thought and a gaining of knowledge throughout this process. Looking at the pathways that our students take and allowing students to take different pathways from one another to get to the same goal is going to be a task and a journey for you as a teacher as well. It means that you don't get to decide all of the things. And it also means that you need to kind of embrace the idea that other students might do things differently. Now, that sounds like a big global mess. If you think about that in a big whole-scale system, you might be thinking that I mean, okay, I give you a topic and then anybody can go any direction to get to the end result. What I mean with different pathways is through specific activities, how might a student show you their learning differently from the student next to them? So for example, if I want to assess a specific learning expectation for one of the units that I am teaching, for instance, I might want to assess specifically that a student can summarize what they read. Yes, the student has to read, but how exactly are they going to show me that they understand how to summarize? And does their summary have to look exactly the same as the person next to them? Could a student decide, given an option of choices, could the student decide to write their summary down in their notebook? Perhaps. Could a student summarize through pictures what happened in the story? Could the student record a video of face to camera with them orally describing the summary of the story? Those three options at the end still get you a summary, but each student has picked the best method for them to give you the information that you require. Not every student is going to excel at a pencil and paper task. And by giving students the option to choose how they're going to show their learning to you, encompasses the ability of you to use student voice and choice in your classroom. It is student-centered, and it respects the fact that not every student is going to perform as well on some tasks as they are on others. So by giving students the option to know themselves better as learners and to choose the best method to show you what they have learned will often get you a better quality overall of assessment data than simply requiring all students to do the same thing at the same time. The most important thing you need to remember when we are looking at being an inquiry classroom is that your job as a teacher is to guide students to find the answers to the questions that they are asking, that you are building knowledge instead of giving instructions, that this is our ultimate responsibility when we are teaching. Although we know the answers and we know how we're going to get there, we want the students to be involved with us and on the journey. We don't want them to be in the back seat of that learning car. We want them to be up front and helping us drive and helping us get from point A to point B. So many times the perception of inquiry is that students should be coming up with an inquiry question and then developing this entire immense project that gets them to change the world. In reality, inquiry doesn't have to be quite so broad. An inquiry can be narrowly focused, and teachers can use an inquiry-based teaching perspective lesson by lesson. So we're going to start with a topic, then we're going to make them curious, get them asking questions, and then guide them on the path to gain new knowledge. And while we're doing that, we're going to embrace student voice and choice. We are going to assess the knowledge that they have learned, and we're going to allow for differentiated pathways to show us what they've learned. If you would like to learn more about using inquiry in your classroom, I would like to invite you to join the Madly Learning membership. By signing up for the membership for free, you can have access to other trainings related to using inquiry in your classroom, as well as getting access to lots of inquiry-based free resources within the membership site. To sign up and be a Madly Learning member, you can go to www.madlylearning.com/membership.